friends! Welcome to Bright Green Futures, episode 33, Climate Resilience with BrightFlame. I'm your host, Susan K. Quinn, and we're here to lift up stories about a more sustainable and just world and talk about the struggle to get there. Today, we're going to have a quick chat with BrightFlame about her story, Ancestors, Descendants, in the new Bright Green Futures anthology, which released on Earth Day. But first, there are 3 things listeners should know. 1, the anthology is a collection of hopeful climate fiction stories from guests on the pod and is available in ebook and print on a wide range of retailers. Now that it's released, you can request that your library carry it as well, and that super helps with making it available to people. BrightFlame's story, second, is published separately as an ebook, and it's free right now, so make sure you go download that after the show. Or just get the anthology, which has all the stories, plus a bonus prose poem. And last, the giveaway will go until May. Lots of cool stuff, handpicked by the authors, each item having a connection to their stories, so make sure to enter that as well. The links for all those things are in the show notes and also on the Bright Green Futures Substack. All right, BrightFlame, thank you for coming back to the pod.
Thank you for having me and for creating this wonderful anthology that I've already had a peek at.
I am so excited about this being out in the world and all your great stories, but just, it's really fulfilling the mission of the podcast to lift up these hopeful stories. So I'm just super excited about that. And I've asked each of the authors in the anthology to pick a theme word, as people will know because if they've been listening to this whole series that we were having of these author interviews. So the theme word is something that represents the story. And I think you gave me a couple of options, but we decided on climate resilience, which is great because resilience sure feels like something we're all struggling with right now and kind of always. And it definitely fits your story as a theme. So why don't you read for us the one-line description of your story and then tell us a little bit about how it speaks to resilience as a theme.
Well, the description of this story, which by the way is one of the first I wrote solar punk stories, so I'm thrilled that it's finding an audience now.
Oh, that is
It's
exciting.
a post-crumble town empties out as people seek safer lands, and the one resident who stays behind finds a kinship they don't expect. So, this is one of my threads stories. It takes place, um, because you might guess from the title, Ancestors, Descendants, it takes place in 2 different times. And we get to see somebody during the really rough climate change years finding a way towards resilience when they're faced with so much. And then seeing later what gets created, and what resilience means in a future where all beings can thrive. And resilience is really core to what I do in the world. A lot of my teaching these days and most of my writing is all about resilience.
That's so great. And I think the structure of your story really does do a good help for the reader. In some ways, it's hard for us to, project forward. We might move forward if a story is set in the future and go, oh, well, this is what it's like in the future, but I don't know how we got there. And you kind of having those 2 pieces of like, well, this is a near future and this is a further future, then it makes it so they can make those threads of connection. And so and threads is I know this, but the listeners might not, that threads is sort of like your name for this larger collection of short stories that share a world. So a lot of the world building that people will see in the story is a part of a larger world. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, fun fact, this is the future that I long to live in and long to create for our future, all the descendants of the lands. And I first went to that future when I was teaching with Starhawk, who some of you might know, who wrote The Fifth Sacred Thing and offers wonderful activist and permaculture workshops these days. Um, and she led a trance journey, something she's famous for, bringing us to the future that we desire. And this is what I saw. So over the years, I've added to it and I've taken my own journeys there and wrote what I saw, what I imagined, what I wanted to create. So the threads are set in the far northeast of Turtle Island in a sea ravaged area. Um, and it's all about humans relating with and creating relationships with the wider web of life and really living connected that way. So the threads are a series or a bunch of interconnected communities that kind of form a big web up in the northeast of the continent.
Oh, I love that. I love the idea of course, connection, because I think that's the key to resilience. Like, resilience and connection are not distinct things, right? We can't really have one without the other, even though we instinctively a lot of times are like, "Oh, I have to make myself resilient." And it's like you really only can do that in the context of this larger web of connection. But I also love that it was part of a visioning process, your trance process, that is your own, vision that you had of a future that you wanted to live in. And that's something that I've been doing more of with folks and trying to encourage people to engage in a process of various kinds. And I see more other people doing this too. We're like, let's let's do some active visioning process, and with the hopes that it will spur, like in your case, to go off and write a whole series of stories around this world that you want to dream into being. And I love that. I love that it was the outcome of that. So that's great.
And well, since that happened, I forget what year that was, we offered those weekends, Starhawk and I've created workshops kind of tangential to that, where it's largely about storying the future and bringing people to the future. So I've done this work with mainstream and spiritual communities, with K-12 teachers in public schools, with writers, and then we get to share what came up and look at the joint visions, because it's futures plural that we're imagining. It's not just one future that fits everybody, right? So
Yeah.
it's the confluence of all our futures that we so desire for this world that will help us get there.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. All the futures aren't even like, even if you had your perfect idea of it and you could even live your own perfect reality in the future, it's just not going to be the same for everyone. And we don't want that, right? We want people to have, freedom of expression and individual lives and such. So that has to be part of it. Equity has to be part of sustainable futures, or else they're not sustainable. As the saying goes, if something is not sustainable, it will not sustain. And so, we need to build that in. So let's talk about your giveaway item, because it is super fun, and so fun. In fact, I decided I needed to keep some for my own. Um, and the giveaway is a couple sets of 3 of these bur oak acorns, which is like the actual bur oak husk, or I think it's called a cup. And then the entire part that's the acorn that's since been dislodged is now like a felted felt, or like a needled felt. And they're just adorable, and I love them. And of course, the bur oak is part of your story. And
A very large part of my story,
very,
in
very
the story and
central.
all the threads, which, by
Yes.
the way, publishers, I'm looking for somebody to publish my whole collection that forms a mosaic novel because it's the threads set in all different times from now till far future.
Well, it is a very big concept that you have, so I can totally see having a constellation of stories built around that. And I'm glad that we have it in the anthology. We even have a little burr, acorn, and leaf on the cover of the anthology for astute observers might see that. Um, but they're just really cute. So I know you don't want to give too much away about how the burr oak connects to the story, and I'm going to leave that for you to say what the connection is, or you could just say it's like a character in the story, however you want to go with that.
Well, it is a character in story, and actually, in this story, in one of the sections of it, those acorns are used by a human character um, in really interesting ways, and yeah, and Burr oak, a massive oak tree, is just really prominent in both sections of this story. So I want you all to meet Burr oak. I hope you'll read my story.
Yes, and you will love these little burr acorns even more after you read the story because you'll have that envision in your head. And they're not little actually. They're kind of like good sized. I'm holding one right now and it's like it holds up my, fills my whole palm. It's a good sized thing, which I think there's like a section in the story where they plant these, and I'm now thinking like, how does that work? You got to like dig a hole to put this in or something. I'm not sure, but I'm intrigued. So,
Yes.
okay, we're getting to the end. These are our short little snippets where we get to visit with our authors and encourage folks to go download Bright Flame Story, go enter take the giveaway, and of course get the anthology and share it with others. But my last question is, what are you doing in these crazy times to stay grounded and keep working for a better world? And I always feel a little silly asking you this question because grounding practices are such a huge part of your, practice as a spiritual practice. Let's put it that way. And so, but you can tell me more.
Right. Well, I hope you all listen to the longer podcast that I did with Susan. When was that? September? I
It
forget
was a
when it
while
came out.
ago, yeah.
November it came out. Because we talked about my novel, The Working, and there's many practices for grounding, for centering, for finding what calls to you in the novel. Those practices are embedded in the novel. And really, doing those things are a big part of what keeps me, well, grounded and centered as much as possible. And I'm not always grounded in these times. It's just so challenging. But being with other people to do this work, whether it's writers, solar punks, other witches who do the kind of thing I do, really helps me. Interconnection is so important. Working in community is so important. Feeds me, feeds others. Um, and that is what keeps us resilient. So, yeah, that thing, that web of us, and the more, I guess, vibrant and full that we all are as nodes in this living web, the more healthy and thriving the whole web of life will be, despite how some people might want to cut it apart and chop it up and
Right.
use it up. So that's what keeps me going,
Oh,
really.
that's great. And so true that, there are forces of all different kinds that are tearing people apart and breaking those connections. And one of the most radical things you can do these days is to just not allow that to happen, or even to double down on strengthening the connections we have with each other, supporting each other, just reaching out. I was thinking even just this morning about how sometimes we think of resilience and connections in terms of like material support, like, with money or housing or food or various, physical things. And those are all super important. But I get so much energy and affirmation and, just things that let me continue to exist from other people who just talking to them, just knowing that there are people that care that I, live or die and want to check in on me and I want to check in on them. And like that is the future that I want to live in. And it's that part of it is already here, at least as much as I can lead into it. So
Mm.
I encourage everybody to think about how they can reach out to someone else and make both of your lives more resilient by strengthening your connections to one another. Thank you so much for coming on the pod again and revisiting with us. And I hope everybody will go out and download your story and buy the anthology and check out all the stories. And thanks again for lending your story to this whole collection.
Thank you, Susan. My pleasure to be among such wonderful authors in this anthology. I hope you all buy the whole anthology, not just download my story. They're really wonderful stories that fit
Well,
together in a lovely way.
they really do. That you guys did a great job of making all the pieces fit, and that short story that's out there free right now is really just a tease to get you to buy the whole anthology. I'm just going to be really upfront about that. So go ahead and do both. Download the free app and get the full anthology. All right. Thanks very much. Have a great day. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Thank you to BrightFlame for joining us today. As I mentioned, the giveaway is ongoing until the end of May, but each individual story is only free for a short time, basically the week the podcast releases. So make sure you go download the free story of the week, or you can just get the whole anthology. As always, the links for everything are in the show notes and on the Bright Green Futures website. You can also help by downloading the free Bright Green Futures zine and sharing it with your friends, especially if they're struggling in these difficult times. Bye for now, and remember to keep imagining the possibilities.